All right, everybody, let's do this. I am Drew McManus, the author of Adaptistration, and this is my podcast, Shop Talk, where I invite captivating guests to talk about engaging topics connected to the orchestra business. And today's two captivating guests are both musicians who do stuff beyond just being musicians. First up, we have Mark Almond. Mark is currently the principal horn of the San Francisco Opera Orchestra, a position he has held since 2016. He was formerly third horn in the Philharmonia Orchestra and recently won the associate principal horn position in the San Francisco Symphony, which he is due to start in the fall. Congratulations on that, by the way. He graduated from Cambridge and Oxford universities and worked as a hospital doctor specializing in pulmonology for 10 years prior to 2016 and has a PhD in pandemic influenza from Imperial College, London. He is currently working on SARS CoV2 research as a postdoctoral research scholar, because people need a hobby, right? And he's doing that at the University of California, San Francisco. Hello, Mark. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me, Drew.
Oh, so and by the accent, I'm assuming Cambridge and Oxford. Those are the real ones, not like the for-profit entities over here in this country.
Yeah, they felt pretty real at the time.
Fabulous. And second up, we have Jason Haaheim, who's back for round two in the podcast. Jason, if you're not familiar with him already, was appointed Principal Timpanist of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra in 2013. He's on faculty at the Bard Conservatory and founded the Deliberate Practice Bootcamp Online and the Northland Timpani Summit. Prior to the Met, he worked for 10 years as a nanotechnologist and holds a master's degree in electrical engineering from UC Santa Barbara. As a sought-after clinician, Mr. Haaheim gives masterclasses internationally and presents at conferences and is an active writer. Hello again, Jason.
Hello, Drew. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you for coming back. So let's start off today's podcast by kind of framing the debate. This is going to be based off of one of Jason's posts at his website, jasonhaaheim.org, and he writes a very popular blog. And he recently wrote something called the shortened version, which is The Need for Expertise. Jason, can you tell us just kind of in a nutshell, break that down in like 30 seconds? What was that about?
Yeah, I mean, it emerged honestly from this journal entry that I started the morning after Lincoln Center shut down on March 12th. And I was looking around the world and seeing, sort of everything starting to shut down and collapse and just trying to make sense of it. And it emerged from a 300-word journal entry into this sprawling, nearly 9,000 word blog post. So sorry, you guys will have to take a little time with that. But the gist is just that watching all that happen, it struck me that there has never been a time where the need for legitimate expertise is more obvious. So I called it the most teachable era in human history for the necessity of expertise. And, I go on to back that up in a lot of different ways, but I think you could take a lot of different metrics to sort of justify that and to really say that we are living through this absolutely catastrophic failure of not having experts in the places we need them to be, or having non-experts in places where we do need experts.
And are you talking primarily, though, about the political world, the artistic world, the intersection between the two, or something different?
Yes.
This will be a simple conversation.
Simple conversation. Well, okay. So I mean, for any of your viewers, listeners, watchers that caught the previous episode, it strikes me that in the previous one, we were talking about some of the structural problems in the arts world, particularly with respect to systemic racism and there I was making the argument about the arts kind of have this repertoire and this message, especially in opera, that is fundamentally progressive and humanistic, and yet the institutions have been bearing the lead on this. Well, why is that? Well, it gets to some of these core problems again. And to me, there's this unifying theme in both of these big pieces about, the mission and what's in the public good, and the fact that none of this stuff is free. And that if you believe in that, if you believe in the mission, if you believe in the public good, you have to support it. You have to vote for it. And so for me, these have been really poignantly connected themes for the last 5 months.
Well, now drilling down into the expertise angle with all of this. I mean, this is kind of why both of you are here. So you're not just musicians, you have degrees of very clearly defined quantitative expertise in other fields. Mark, you're using that now actively in research. And, I have to imagine there's got to be people who probably believe, you're there just like, inches away from that moment they see in the films where you're just ready to make the breakthrough and go, I've got it solved. True?
Yeah, not quite. I wish it was like that. But no, science is, it's slow, it's methodical, and it's pretty unsexy. Yeah, so today I was feeding cells in a tissue culture lab. I then went into a BSL-3 lab wearing the full suit to infect some cells with virus, and then you leave it overnight, and then you come back, and then you take the cells off, and then you do a lot of analysis, and it's really slow, and it's not results aren't guaranteed. Anyone that's done cell culture knows that cells are temperamental, and it takes time. So it's and also I supposedly it takes science is a very, very scientists have very, very specific roles. So I may be looking at COVID, but I'm looking at a very, very specific area. I'm not going to be getting a cure for COVID, but hopefully I'll be contributing to the body of knowledge that will eventually get there.
And I think you could have applied almost everything that wasn't very COVID specific about what you were talking about to practicing Schoenberg as well.
It's absolutely true. Yeah.
There's a lot of just whiling away, and the results are anything but guaranteed.
Yeah, totally. And that ability to analyze what you're doing in science definitely applies to the practice route.
And being part of a team effort.
Very much. Well, and actually that is kind of interesting, because I think just even my own perception of what happens in science, as far as when they're in the lab and they're actually working, I don't have a clear vision in my head of it being a team effort the same way that an actual rehearsal is, as opposed to individual practice is for musicians. Without going down that rabbit hole too far, I actually am really curious to see what both of your opinions are on that distinct element between the scientific and medical communities that you've worked in, and then inside the live cultural classical music community.
I think obviously within the orchestra itself, the collaboration is just a lot closer and a lot more immediate. I obviously in the lab, I obviously just I pass my samples on to various people, and someone will do this aspect and someone will do that aspect, and it takes a couple of days to get stuff back. Where obviously that feedback is instantaneous within the orchestra. But still, there's a conductor in the science lab. You've got your PI, your boss, who will coordinate everything and manage it. So I think, there are a lot of similarities there.
I also think conferences are sort of like our performance. You literally get up there and you give a talk and you're performing. And I always had colleagues that were just terrified of public speaking and going to present results. But I'd been performing long enough. I was like, this is fine. I got this. But also that's where so much of the collaboration happens. And then, you go get drinks with these collaborators and at the bars when you're scribbling things on napkins, and it is this ensemble team science effort, The
thing I find different between presenting at a conference and doing a concert is, you always know what you're going to do in a concert. I think, you've prepared your piece. Yeah. And you play your piece. And unless something crazy goes on in the audience and something very unexpected, it goes like that. Whereas in a conference, you can have prepared your presentation absolutely perfectly, and then you'll get some genius ask a question, which you had no idea and totally knocks you off track. So that's the difference. So I had to get more nervous presenting at a conference than I do doing a concerto with an orchestra.
See, to me, those were like jazz gigs where somebody in the audience is like, Freebird! And the guy's like, well, I guess we're doing Freebird. I was like, what? No.
Yeah, there's a reason there aren't that many jazz French hornists. Although there are excellent ones, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a very interesting connective piece to the topic of expertise that we're talking about, because this is something that I've always found musicians are unique with, maybe compared to some other fields, which is they are all extraordinarily highly trained, but they are very delineated with their training. You can ask a violinist about a French horn or about a tuba player, and what they know about those instruments is really kind of limited to a large degree. I mean, it's not in a lot of cases that much more than a typical, core audience member who's done some research on their own. But the example you used, Mark, of being in a conference and having someone who asks a real genius level kind of question, I'm imagining that expertise is going to intersect in a different way than expertise intersects inside the music community. Would you, agree, disagree, see parallels there?
I think it's really quite different because, when it comes to the collaboration and interaction within music, it's subjective to a large degree. You may have your strong opinions about how something goes and it just may simply differ. Whereas, there is a degree of subjectivity in science as well, but I think, if you're wrong about something and you've missed something, you've missed something. So I think there's that difference there between objectivity and subjectivity in the subject matter.
Well, can I tackle that in a slightly different direction? Because I think that's a really interesting point. Mark, so just the audience knows, Mark and I have been collaborating on this other project, part of my Deliberate Practice seminar. And we've had some interesting conversations about how the whole system of auditioning is very different in the United States than in the UK. And, one of the hallmarks of a US audition system is the screened round. So you have a blind audition with, for example, a bunch of musicians listening to an instrument they don't play. So I don't know the first thing about how to make an oboe reed, but yet we're sitting there making these decisions about these players. And of course, some of these factors are subjective. Of course, aspects of interpretation and tone and style and some of these things. But we shouldn't really be arguing about intonation. Intonation's objective. Time and rhythm are objective. Did they play the right notes? These are objective things. And I actually kind of find this to be when you've got collaborations of scientists where, again, science is, the general audience might not know this, but when you get to PhD level science work, it is extremely niche-y, extremely. Oh, yeah. And you will get people who are basically working on very similar projects who still have to sit and translate to each other for 20 minutes before you know what each other are talking about. But you do have this baseline of a language and a sort of foundation of understanding and knowledge. And to me, that's again, that's the fundamentals: time, rhythm, intonation, the notes on the page. And then you start to suss out, okay, you did that. Okay, were you using microcontact printing or atomic force microscopy? Oh, you did transmission electron microscopy? Oh, okay. Wait, well, how does that work again? And, you kind of go back and forth, and then you eventually get to some sort of understanding. You're like, all right, okay, so maybe we can work together on this.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think when you do go down to the fine details of particular protocols for certain things, there's definitely, did you wash the cells after this infection, and why did you do that, and why did you add this particular amount of virus, etc. So I think when you're taking it down to that level, I think there certainly is subjectivity.
Right. Timpani have pedals? What?
That's when they make the funny noise, isn't it?
Yeah, the funny noise. Yeah, like in Bartok.
Well, let's now take that to the next step, I think, which is maybe connecting these two worlds, because Jason, you touched on this some in your article, which is looking at the pandemic from the musician's perspective. There is a great deal of fear over what's being lost, but preparing for what comes next. I think that was one of the headers in in your post. And it's fascinating to watch musicians interact with one another, especially on social media or in comment threads to blog posts. And everybody wants to try to apparently like latch on to a particular camp. You know, there's the whole pro science, what I think is, you know, science is called alternative fact science or whatever they want to use. And they'll bludgeon each other over a decision that an organization will or won't make about whether to cancel a season or if they're going to try doing something else. You know, both of you, because you're opera, which is, I think, decidedly different than orchestral, because opera has far more moving parts and far more concerns than the orchestra field does, and far less options, actually. I just wanted to get your feedback on just what you're observing, being scientists especially, watching your colleagues who are strictly musicians having these kind of conversations. Mark, what do you think?
I think that's a very complicated question for a start. And, you know, obviously everyone wants to go back to work as quickly as they can, and they want to do it in a safe manner. And people are therefore attaching a lot of importance to information that comes their way. And sometimes, again, going back a step, you have to be aware that production of scientific papers is a lengthy process, and it's done by experts, and then those experts have their data and their methods peer reviewed before things are published. Now, things are being accelerated at this moment because of the nature of COVID. However, people basically lots of information is being presented to musicians on social media without peer review, and people are often jumping on that and coming to conclusions which are perhaps they're attaching too much importance to these preliminary results. And I think also people are not necessarily looking at who's writing these papers and who's funding these papers. Because, you know, if I was at a, you know, all medics have journal clubs, all scientists have journal clubs, and they, you know, critically appraise papers. And one of the first things you do is look at who's written it, just as if you're a historian. You know, you look at who wrote the article. And I think some of these, I'm not going to name specific articles, but some of these articles, you need to look at who's writing them and who's funding them and what their scientific background is, and what their interest is beyond the paper.
Jason?
I was going to say, I think that's 100% accurate. And I might add to that by saying that one of the other, there's a book I reference in the article called Thinking Fast and Slow by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. And Kahneman was famous for a lot of things in his life. He sort of accidentally invented behavioral economics, and he's a psychologist, and he was studying different, you know, modes of cognition and you know, cognitive fallacies and all these other things. But among one of his major contributions to the field is sort of highlighting how Homo sapiens, like human beings, are just inherently terrible at assessing asymmetric risk. So asymmetric risk is something where, like, the upside might be nice and the downside is utterly catastrophic. But we often lack the perspective to extrapolate to what those conditions are. And we just sort of treat them as like, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, right? I think you can see that playing out right now on August 20th as various schools around the country have been like, yeah, we'll be able to reopen. It'll be fine. It'll be, oh my God, we have to shut down, you know? And it's like, this was very predictable, you guys. Like, you know, whether it's UNC, whether it's Notre Dame or any of the others to come. Again, like, I'm not saying that people going to school isn't important. It is. But now we've had this experiment that was knowable in advance, where all these students went there and they got sick, and now they're going back home to reinfect like their families and their parents and their communities. The risk, the asymmetry of the risk in the orchestra world, and particularly in the opera world, where from the pit of the Met, and I'm sure, Mark, you could see this, the singers are just going, and you can see the spray going out like 30 feet into the audience, right? That's aerosol transmission. It's right there.
Well, it's interesting you talk about aerosol transmission stuff, because a lot of, understandably, there's been a huge spike in interest in aerosol transmission and wind instruments. And
best understatement ever.
Well, you could study that. You could study it, till the cows come home. But ultimately, until community prevalence has come down, you're still not going to get organizations working to the capacity they want to work. So I think people sort of lose light of that fact. They're focusing on, oh great, well, do I need to put a pair of tights over my trumpet, or play in the perspex box, which is important in terms of, like, if you're going to do electronic projects, etc., and gathering with groups of people. But yes, the cities aren't going to allow you to go back until community prevalence is down, and you shouldn't be go back. Yeah, and you notice in all these countries where there are concerts happening now, the community prevalence is down. So people need to behave. Well, and then once people behave, you can go back to work.
First of all, wear a freaking mask. Like, let's just get that out there. Wear your mask. But yeah, like just to unpack that community prevalence idea, because this is a little bit of a scientific term, but I mean, it's like how much virus is out there in people, right? And I mean, since March, it has been abundantly clear that we need to test a lot, and then we need to contact trace, and then we need to isolate, and we need to do this robustly at a federal level. And it was also pretty much equally obvious in March, and then definitely April, and definitely May, that this was just not going to be happening in the United States. It hasn't been happening. It's not happening now. It won't be happening until January at the earliest, maybe, if we're lucky, Mm-hmm. We've got these situations where schools are like, yeah, we're going to reopen. We're going to be running tests. We're going to be testing all these people. And yet the testing supply chains are horribly strained. Mm-hmm. And it's taking 7 to 10 days to get test results. Well, when it's taking 10 days to get a test result back, you may as well not be testing. But it doesn't even matter at that point, right? So that's the community prevalence thing. And I think the problem is that, like, lacking that understanding of the surrounding environment, there is no way to do concert indoor performances safely. There just isn't.
Okay, now I want to springboard right off of that, because you really couldn't have set that up for what I wanted to dive into, which really wasn't something I think your article really hit as much, which in the what comes next category. Because the reality, I think, certainly from what I'm hearing from the two of you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there are enough unknowns. Nobody should be making long-term plans one way or another, regardless, right now. Is something has to happen. We can't do nothing as our business model and our game plan moving forward. One of the problems in this field, at least from an administrative perspective, is with regard to earned income. And for folks watching us who may not know how the revenue stream model works, performing arts organizations get their revenue from contributed revenue and from earned income, which is like selling tickets. And those are their two main revenue streams. There's a third that's a combination of grants and then investment money. And when one of those three areas kind of collapses, like we're seeing now, the organization basically just falls in upon itself as well, because it hasn't really done a great job of diversifying inside those revenue streams. So if you can't sell tickets to a traditional concert where a bunch of people show up and sit in an environment that is entirely unsafe right now, what do you do? What can you do? Is this now the time to begin to look toward expertise, not just to figure out or confirm what we can and can't do in the traditional sense, but is this now an opportunity to begin to move in a different direction, to begin to diversify, to use the talent we have safely, securely, and start to branch out and do something different? I just want to toss that out at both of you. And I can just tell just by looking at the response right now that there's wheels turning, and I'm really curious to hear what's coming back. Mark, you're up first.
Okay, so one thing that experts should be is humble, and they should admit when they don't know something. And you see Fauci doing this a lot of the time. He'll get asked some curveball question about something, and is that the right term? I'm not American. Curveball. I'll say that curveball question. And
you can take a drink every time he uses a British word.
Yeah, and he says, I don't know. And in fact, there are some fabulous, there's a fabulous virology podcast where there's an absolute world expert in virology who interviews him, and he frequently says, I don't know. So when it comes to, this side of things with the orchestral management thing, I'm relatively new to this. It's as Jason said, it's a different system in the UK and the US. And so, I don't know the answer to what you're saying, but in terms of, what my gut thinks, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to expand the media departments and getting yourself out there. As for the revenue streams, I'm not sure about that. With regards to the expertise, again, I can only really speak from a medical point of view. And yeah, so this is something I haven't got my head around yet, which is lots of orchestras and organizations are getting medics together or groups of experts to advise on going back to work. But I'm not sure what's happening in terms of coordination between the organizations. And I know some bodies have put money towards researching aerosol things, but there's lots of, I don't understand what's happening in terms of coordination. And I think it would be really nice to have a sort of a really big coordinating effort with experts. And when I say experts, I mean people that really know what they're talking about with regards to the factors relevant to the problem. Because I think, you can, an organization can hire a doctor who's a very eminent expert in their field, but they may not know anything particularly about the way about COVID transmission. You need a team of experts, and so I think a doctor is a doctor, and they have their specialist areas. Just because I'm an expert on supposedly on influenza, I've got a very niche specialty within that. I looked specifically at the effects of. I spent 3 years of my life doing horn practice, but also at the same time looking at the effect of obesity on the innate immune response to pandemic influenza A. You know what? It is actually very fascinating. If I'd kept on with that, it's a really hot topic at the moment within COVID. But I chose to be a musician. So just because you have a title and you've got lots of letters after your name doesn't make you an expert on COVID. And that's what I was saying again. And you need to be part of a team, and you need to have a team of experts. So going back to your original question, I don't know about the management side of things, but yeah, experts, you need to define expert really carefully, and there needs to be good coordination between the ensembles on a national level, I think, and even an international level.
Jason, you're looking contemplative.
Yeah, well, because first of all, I absolutely agree. Like, I don't envy the job of anyone at like the director, GM, president level of any performing arts institution right now. I mean, you're to be blunt, you're eating a shit sandwich, and I'm sorry. Like, none of us signed up for this. It was never supposed to get to this. That's one way to look at this. Like, almost getting very meta about this. We sort of like signed this contract as a species when we came out of the like hunter-gatherer situation, and we're like, hey, we're going to be in cities now. Cool. Oh my God, we're all dying from infectious disease. Okay, so what we need to do now is manage infectious disease. That's the bargain to like have civilization. And we broke that bargain with ourselves. And so now we're all just like improvising in a situation that never should have happened like this. And so I'm partially tempted to say, like, I don't know that there is a clean, good answer for arts institutions in the United States right now. I mean, you're choosing between a menu of very bad options. We're not going to have huge, influx of government funding to rescue all of this. Again, pending at least another 6 months, and we'll see what happens. And maybe we'll have a arts work progress administration. Who knows? That'd be great. But yeah, there's a lot of bad options to choose from. That being said, I am reminded of the conversation that you and I had with Weston, where there's like a lot of institutions that have known about fundamental retooling that they need to be doing. And it was always pushed off to like, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources, we just got to survive to next quarter, we just got to survive to the end of the fiscal year. Well, maybe now's the time. If not now, when, right? And in the Mets case, I mean, we talked at length about some of those issues. I think you could take any of these issues of, again, not just community outreach, but actual engagement, like rethinking what your mission in the community is, so that on the other side of this, if your organization is still standing, you're actually there and able to engage with the community. It's like a sort of co-equal member of it, and not just like lecturing down from the rooftop, bestowing your great art, right? And that's just the problem that way too many organizations fall into. Like, we're basically just missionaries evangelizing to the natives, and okay, now we're going to go back to our ivory tower. Not a great way to like build your audience, right? And everyone knows that, or says they know it, and then yet nothing has really fundamentally changed about the way we approach this. So, but to your point, it takes effort, it takes creativity, it takes a certain amount of expertise in how you can execute on these plans.
There's a couple of words you used that really jumped out at me that I found fascinating in an ironic way. Is you use the word improvisation, which is the one thing this field is not known for.
Yeah.
Artistically and every other sense of the word that needs to kind of happen now. But I think you also, touched on what I was hoping both of you would kind of hit on with the whole what comes next scenario, which is the reality of where we are at right now is, I think it's fair to say most, if not everyone, has come to terms and accepted the fact that this is ostensibly out of control. It's going to run its course, whatever that course is going to be. Whatever hopes we had of control or the rest of it is likely not going to happen. And within that reality, we now have choices. We can either surrender and say it's just bad luck, wrong time in history, and we're just going to shut down, and because we don't want to be innovative or we don't want to push ourselves, or you can take the yes and approach. I don't know if either of you have read that wonderful book by Kelly Leonard, Yes and.
I have not.
I haven't read it, but I know its importance in improv comedy. Yeah.
Well, and Kelly took that concept and then started to apply it to an institutional concept, which it does all come down to playing the scene you're dealt. I mean, whatever the scene you're in is what you work with. You don't try to change it. You don't try to influence it, which in its own way to me always seems like it kind of harkens back to the old sobriety, prayer, grant me the wisdom and serenity to be able to control things that I can do. And that's really what I don't see the field as a whole realizing where their strengths are. And this connects back to what the topic I want to talk about next, which is legitimate versus bullshit expertise. Because if you're going to control the things you can, you first really have to be able to identify between the two of them. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Legitimate versus bullshit expertise, and where can it lead us in either direction? Jason, you're up first on that one.
It's probably worth noting where that came from. So again, this was sort of me paraphrasing Daniel Kahneman in his book. But he has this fairly extensive description of sort of the taxonomies of expertise, and like, how do you know somebody's an expert or not? Like, what does this mean? And, 2 marks, multiple points. Just having a bunch of letters after your name doesn't really guarantee anything. You have to be in your correct environment, in your domain of expertise knowledge. But once you're there, like, the hallmark of expertise is being able to demonstrate skill. And what Kahneman did is he went into banks and asked their, highly paid money managers, will demonstrate your skill. And over a long enough time span, they can't. Nobody beats the market. So he told the, executives of the bank, like, you're paying these guys for nothing. And they said, thank you very much. No, don't disrupt our industry. And Kahneman came around and was like, well, that's illegitimate expertise. That's the illusion of skill. That's bullshit expertise. The thing is, it exists in a lot of different places, right? And I mean, to my mind, there's some very interesting parallels in the music world, because whereas instrumental musicians in the United States demonstrate legitimate expertise by virtue of at least passing out of screened rounds, right? You might not be the best player in the world, but like you're at least
during the audition.
During an audition, right. You demonstrate skill that is objective and undeniable and borne witness to by a committee of peers, right? Not to rag on any conductors, but that doesn't always happen, right? We all know conductors who, they can wave a stick around, but their skills are much more political, and they're good with donors, and they, you take them out to dinner with the CEO or the GM, and boy, they're a good hang, and they get invited back, and the players in the orchestra are always like, oh no, not this bozo again, right? And so that's a different kind of expertise, but conducting does require expertise. It's just that some of the people on the podium don't always possess that. And then I think you can kind of project that vision or that model up into the various echelons of arts management.
Mark, you're looking contemplative as well.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of, it's such a strange time at the moment because, we have incredible experts in this country advising people, and there's a certain lack of leadership, which is, putting those people down and totally rejecting their advice. And that's why we haven't flattened our curve. And, Jason mentions in his article about the CDC and replacement of people at the top there, and the fact that, a certain president will, talk down what Fauci says, and he is an expert, he is a legitimate expert. And then you'll just get some, I don't go in my lab, I'm not sticking light bulbs in various places and drinking bleach and testing that, and how is that? That's
as polite as you could have said that ever.
Yeah.
I just
very British.
It's so it's insane at the moment. I don't understand it, because where are we if we don't trust the experts? There should be a degree, there should be criticism of experts from fellow experts and peer review. It's vital for science. But at the moment, the people we are totally depending on are being trounced by leaders. And again, I'm going to air quotes for the leaders there. And even Britain. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about Trump because my immigration status will probably be affected by that. But I can talk about.
You've got that, and you're not tenured yet. Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'll be very political here. No. So I was in the UK. I was in the UK at the start of the pandemic in March, and San Francisco had just shut down. San Francisco was really well behaved. Everyone was wearing masks. Everyone was respecting each other and being kind, and generally was realizing, okay, this sucks, but we've got to do it. I went to the UK and I arrived there. I was wearing my mask. I was wearing gloves on the tube. All the Brits were typically looking at me like going, who's that weirdo? And I hand sanitizing. And I was just like, why isn't everything shut down? Why is the tube packed? Why are all the bars and restaurants closed? Open, packed. They were absolutely packed. What's going on here? And, I remember I went to a concert because I was going over there to play, and it was the last concert in the UK before the shutdown. It was packed, but I managed to find some spaces where there were no people, and I moved away from this old lady, and this old lady then moved from her seat and came and sat next to me, and I said to her, "Have you not?" I said in a slightly sarcastic, "Have you not heard of social distancing?" Says, "Well, I just want to sit here." And I just sat there for this concert, and I'm just like, I could hear all these, over 65 people coughing away in this concert. And I just left because I was just like, oh God. And Boris, didn't shut the country down for another 10 days, and that probably cost 40,000 lives.
Yeah.
And where was the expertise, And now, people have realized this, but you need to listen. And again, there were some issues in the UK with the science and some conflicting messages. And Jason touches that in his about that in his article about people make mistakes, but there is just this. We're living in a time where there's just and Obama touched on it as well. It's just people aren't respecting science anymore. And it's just so dangerous. And I don't understand it because I come from a world of where from being a medical student, it's all about evidence-based medicine. Everything has to have a proper scientific basis. And people are just going off what they see on Twitter at the moment. It's quite depressing.
Let me make both of you a little uncomfortable. Because with that question, you both retreated to the place that you're most comfortable, which is the scientific, the quantifiable. It's, I think, easier to recognize expertise. And the question was, in our field, the performing arts, the nonprofit cultural performing arts, right now, how are you going to be able to tell the difference between legitimate and bullshit expertise for the people who are tasked with leading us through and out of where we are and what we will become? Because you have a very vested interest in this.
I'll tackle that. I was actually just about to get to that point, because the thing Mark's talking about, where you have armchair epidemiologists, people who are economists getting on TV talking as if they have any idea about virology or community spread or any of this, reminds me of conversations I've had with board members of performing arts institutions where they're telling me what we need to be doing with our work rules. Right? So
related to COVID.
Just related scenarios. Generally, right?
Okay.
So again, gotcha. Any contract negotiation of any performing arts, you're going to have wages, pension, benefits, and work rules. The four biggies, gotcha. Right? Mm-hmm. Work rules exist very often for very good reasons that have been hammered out over years by experts, which is us, so that we don't hurt ourselves or so that we don't damage aspects of the performance of the institution, or so that the stagehands aren't running on 16 hours of, continuous work and no sleep, and then they forget to plug something in and the stage is right. Like, these things matter, and there's really high stakes. And yet, during these often contentious contract negotiations, we get lectured to about this stuff by people who have literally no goddamn idea what they're talking about.
Just on that as well, I would, you ask how you would judge the expertise and the people leading these organizations, and I would just naturally say, I judge these people on who they surround themselves by in terms of real experts. The organizations need to surround themselves with a crack team of experts and not just, your local family physician. And if you've got put together a crack team, then I'd have a lot more faith in expertise.
I mean, just getting specific for a minute, at the Met, since I've been there, what I have witnessed myself personally, serving on committees, being a part of contract negotiations, and management's approach to work rules, I have zero confidence that they would be able to proceed in a post-COVID or transitional environment, bearing in mind everyone's health and safety is the priority. Because they haven't yet. And exactly like what Mark is saying, you see it by the record of what they've done, the decisions they've made, all of the omissions, and the people they surround themselves with. I don't know that there is a perfect solution to this, lacking, clearing house and starting over with a new team in there, right? But how do you recognize that expertise? Well, it's not that much different now than it's always been. Is what they're talking about supportable? Does it make sense? Is it rational? Or is it just a bunch of BS constructed talking points that are fundamentally being driven by some, ideological agenda on a board, right?
And just, again, for me, keeping things non-specific, for this is just not for performing arts organizations, but people need to remember that organizations will be remembered for how they treat their employees during this incredibly hard time, not just performing arts organizations. And I think that needs to be remembered.
Hear, hear.
I think that's very optimistic. I hope it's the case, and I'll actually walk that statement back. There absolutely will be people, because my mind immediately, first of all, for context, went to large donors. Because when you talk about how an organization treats its employees in this field, that is driven very much by the large donor community. There's still very much the golden rule in that sense. And it can be very good and it can be very bad because that goal is attached to people and people are different. So from that aspect, I think we are definitely going to be in a situation where I think that's very true, but the outcomes to determine success, let's call it, are going to be fluid. And that's about as nice as I can say that as well.
Well, let me put a slightly different spin on that.
Okay.
Science is fundamentally about being skeptical all of the time, right? It is rooted in skepticism. And right now is a moment I think musicians need to be deeply skeptical. I do not believe, across the plaza from the Metropolitan Opera is the David H. Koch Theater. Big money donor for New York City Ballet. Do I believe that David Koch has the best interests, the health and welfare of those New York City Ballet Orchestra musicians in mind as his top priority? I do not. I absolutely do not. I think that's self-evident if you know anything about American politics and the Koch family and all of that. So I think musicians are right to be skeptical right now because these risks, like I said, are incredibly asymmetric.
It's a good thing to let just sit and kind of sink in for a little bit, to say the least. And it actually might even be a good place to, I think, kind of wrap things up here as well, too, because we've gone on just about the length of time, actually a little bit over from what we usually do. And like all things, I just want to keep talking for another 2 hours. And, just buy another round and just keep going with this stuff. Because there is a lot of really good to go into. One thing we didn't touch on that maybe we can come back in a couple of weeks and do another episode is really how musicians are starting to interact with each other more. And it never ceases to amaze me watching groups of musicians just beat the living daylights out of each other up online over, no, that's the wrong attitude to have, no, that's the right attitude to have, or whatever, about going back to work early or doing something this or the rest of it. And then they'll support it with other complete extreme opposites that as though one thing like a vaccine is going to be the cure-all of now it's all fine, we can go back to normal sort of idea. And I hope if what anyone has walked away from listening to both of you in this particular episode is absolutism is a very dangerous piece of territory.
Yep.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad I'm getting nodding heads out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was a doctor, when I first started seeing referrals for patients, when I first started off in pulmonology, you'd get referred a patient from a surgeon and say, can you sort this problem out? And I would go to the patient and I would expect there to be a correct, absolute right answer about how to fix this problem. And it used to drive me mad. And I got quite upset about it because after a couple of months, I just you could make suggestions. And then I suddenly twigged, I realized there is no right answer. There's the most practical, sensible, correct solution, but there's no absolute right answer. I think a similar thing applies here in that, you're never gonna make the risk absolutely zero, no matter what you do. You could test everyone, the day before, and you're still never gonna make the risk absolutely zero. And I think people need to accept that.
Excellent. Jason, anything to add there?
The only other ending thought for this is, in encouraging musicians to be skeptical is also to start to change our expectations. I think I actually maybe referred to this in the previous episode we recorded, but the Atlantic writer who's been covering COVID masterfully, Ed Yong, had this wonderful quote that was just, we're especially as musicians, we're like, oh, we just want to get back to normal. We want to play. We want things to go back to normal. And he said, normal led to this. I actually don't want things to get back to normal. I don't think they can. I don't think they should. I think our industry, our entire field, has the opportunity for truly transformational change. And it's hard to know exactly what that's going to look like. And these prescriptions are awfully difficult. But that is actually something that leaves me feeling more hopeful. That there's going to be a lot of pain going through this, but that some of these changes have been obvious and necessary for a long time. And this is an opportunity.
And brilliant on both of those. And I'll say one additional thing to the transformational change. You'll know you have bullshit expertise when you find somebody trying to attach settling old scores and repackaging it as transformational change, which is something this field in particular is an expert at. So yes, if we want to be positive, which we all should be, and we want to be hopeful, which deep down I am, yes, transformational change has never been more affordable than right now.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's transformational change with a 0% loan.
There we go. All right, it's a great place to end things. Thank you both, Mark and Jason, for being here. Jason, this is excellent to see you again. Mark, it is just brilliant to be able to meet your acquaintance, and I hope this is not the last time our paths cross.
Cheers. Thanks for having me, Drew.
Thanks, Drew.
All right, take care, guys. Bye-bye.